It's hidden from nobody that slaves had to face the worst forms of atrocities. However, some hidden sad truths never came to the surface about the black slaves. Even if everyone knows that slaves were treated worse than animals, like a commodity over which masters had complete control. But only a few know how the inhuman and immoral treatment seeped into even the most private parts of slaves' lives. Earlier kept confidential records have now surfaced that show how black slaves were bred. It's the sad reality that slaves were kept in farms where they were allowed to breed. It's no different than animal breeding farms. But what more stayed hidden about the black slaves' breeding farms? Welcome to a new episode of Black Culture Diary, a channel where we talk about less known and hidden black history, culture, arts, and lost civilization. We scrutinize history here to bring the black culture back on the surface again. In this episode, we will disclose how black slaves were kept in breeding farms and forced to mate. Let's get started. The first question one thinks about is why there was a need for slave breeding farms. When people could buy slaves from the market, why did they turn to slave breeding? Well, the answer lies in the changing conditions of slavery. In the 18th century, slavery was legal in almost all parts of the world. Traders in Europe and America could go to Africa and capture as many slaves as they wanted. On return, they would sell those slaves in open markets, the same way as one would sell silk cloths of the distant world. However, black slaves were far from silk clothes for their masters, who would use them for the hardest jobs, forcing them to work in the worst conditions. But in the 19th century, the famous transatlantic slave trade was about to collapse. In Britain, a coalition led by William Wilberforce, comprising Quakers and evangelicals, established the Committee for the Abolition of Slave Trade. The year 1807 witnessed the passage of the Slavery Trade Act by the British Parliament, marking a significant turning point in colonial Britain and intensifying calls for the abolition of slavery in America. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the economic importance of slave labor and its outputs continued to expand. Culturing lucrative crops such as sugarcane, cotton, and rice, particularly in the Deep South and Western regions, held considerable political significance. Before the American Civil War outbreak, the phrase "King Cotton" epitomized the monopoly held by slave states over their abolitionist counterparts in the North. The economic dominance of cotton was so profound that secessionist states firmly believed that conflict with the northern states was highly improbable. In the intricate tapestry of United States history, during an era when slave labor yielded substantial profits, both Congress and President Thomas Jefferson lent support to the calls for abolition. In 1808, the official prohibition of slave importation into America was enacted. However, the invention of the cotton gin and the subsequent surge in cotton production and labor demand only served to reinforce the economic indispensability of slavery. That's when the concept of black slave breeding farms was introduced. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Earlier, masters could buy slaves from the market because the transatlantic slave trade was legal. However, after 1808, a ban on slave imports was put in. There was no way masters could have slaves to increase the production of their crops. Here, it should be noted that the 1809 Prohibition Act only banned slave imports. However, slavery inside the country was legal. This created a loophole for the slave traders and masters, who could now open slave farms and produce as many slaves as they wanted. The enactment of the 1808 Prohibition Act served as a shield for the internal slave market, allowing slave owners to intensify their efforts chillingly. Slave owners call breeding a natural increase, disregarding the deliberate management and joint manipulation involved. In a perplexing web of priorities, enslaved black women in America became a rare commodity, receiving minimal health care, if any at all. Ned and Constance Sublet's book, The American Slave Coast, aptly describes how the womb of an enslaved woman became a capitalized source of fertility, with its safeguarding becoming paramount to those involved in the slave trade. It is worth noting that home medical journals began circulating to assist enslaved women through difficult births, a stark departure from the previous neglect they endured. Black female slaves were expected to bear 4 to 5 children, their high mortality rate being a crucial element in the importance placed on breeding. Female slaves, deemed as good breeding stock, were often advertised for sale. These women found themselves constantly being traded and incentivized by both slave owners and plantation owners. It was not uncommon for an enslaved woman to be offered freedom in exchange for bearing 15 children. The grim reality was girls as young as 12 or 13 could be forced into pregnancy and give birth, only to have their child torn away from them, destined for a life of slavery. Under this system, people became nothing more than products, subjected to dehumanization at every turn. For enslaved women, the burden of childbearing began as early as 13 years old. They would likely be expected to have endured 4 to 5 pregnancies by the time they turned 20. Vulnerabilities faced by enslaved women within this breeding system were manifold. The 19th century slave market in America had no qualms about selling pregnant women. It is widely argued that the life of a female slave in America was a harrowing cycle of rape, pregnancy, and neglected postpartum recovery lasting a mere few weeks before being subjected to the expectation of pregnancy once again. Numerous accounts reveal that masters and slave owners themselves fathered children with their slaves, with no legal protections or recognition of their personhood. The system forcefully extracting children from enslaved women can only be characterized as systematic rape. Breeding farms epitomized inequality, with white owners illegally shielded while black counterparts had no rights whatsoever. Sexual abuse within this context was decidedly one-sided, with slave accounts documenting the intrusive control slave owners had over the intimate lives of their property. Within the twisted realm of slavery, arranged marriages and forced mating were deeply embedded in a sinister breeding culture that stripped human beings of their dignity. The conditions under which they were bred mirrored the treatment of animals, illustrating the depths of dehumanization. Testimonies from enslaved individuals shed light on the existence of stockmen, male slaves brought onto farms to impregnate female slaves owned by their masters. This disturbing practice of importing bucks became a prevalent theme in the despicable breeding industry, as slave owners sought to maximize the production of slaves capable of enduring grueling physical labor in the fields. A noteworthy study by economist Richard Stouch in 1860 examined Virginia's farms, revealing a shocking ratio of approximately 2 female slaves for every male slave. The study estimated that females surpassed males by as many as 300,000. Such a stark imbalance strongly suggests that the primary purpose of this breeding practice was to sustain the lucrative domestic breeding industry. During the era of slavery, a deeply entrenched racist ideology justified slave owners' imposition of their will upon their enslaved individuals, a notion sadly embraced by many. While slave owners turned a blind eye to the systematic rape occurring on breeding farms, they convinced themselves that their authority was preferable to the autonomy of black slaves. House slaves faced the highest risk of falling victim to their master's sexual abuse. Consequently, many enslaved women who bore children would shield them from their master's wives, fearing the exposure of the father's identity. Obviously, the despicable breeding practices and abuse within this factory-like system served one purpose alone: to enhance and solidify profits. As people were cruelly reduced to property, the wealth generated by this abhorrent industry grew exponentially. By the mid-1800s, the value of the South slave trade was estimated to be around $4 billion, far surpassing the combined national income from gold, silver, currency, and even southern farmland. Slaveholders had turned enslaved individuals into highly valuable assets, surpassing their wildest expectations. Shockingly, during the early 1800s, the slave trade transitioned slaves from mere property to being treated as securities. While history books have well documented the dehumanization of individuals and their reduction to property, the legal aspect of this transformation has received less scrutiny, perhaps due to its repugnant implications. In the 1830s, slave owners sought to further capitalize on their property by using them as collateral to secure additional capital in their states. Banks were established in influential southern states, including Louisiana and Mississippi, where slaves were mortgaged as property. These mortgages were then bundled into bonds that could be sold globally, enabling individuals across the world, even in countries where slavery had been outlawed, to profit from bonds backed by the value of enslaved human beings. This sardonic twist exposes the true nature of a supposedly enlightened world. Did you know that the treatment of slaves had fallen to such lower levels that one feels ashamed? What do you think? Should people be taught how black slaves were kept in breeding farms and forced to breed? Let us know your opinions on the moral decay of the slaves' masters that had normalized breeding slaves on farms. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.